It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome back to the show, my friends. I am your host, Eric Szilagyi. If you've had an uncomfortable experience and you'd like to have it shared here on the show, please get a hold of me at contact.uncomfortable@gmail.com. The world wants to hear your experiences. They want to hear your cryptid and UFO experiences. So reach out to me and let's get yours on the next episode of Uncomfortable. If you haven't yet, make sure to like us on Facebook and Instagram, both at Uncomfortable Podcast 65. And once you get a chance to listen to an episode or two, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating and review wherever you can. That alone is the one most important thing that you can do to help get this show out in front of more people. And with more people listening, that means more great experiences coming your way. If video is more your thing, then make sure to subscribe to Uncomfortable Podcast on YouTube, where you can get the video version of most shows. If that's where you listen to us, please make sure to click like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're notified with each and every new release. Take a minute and check out the Uncomfortable link tree. It's the single best place that you can find anything and everything uncomfortable all in one spot. The link for that is down below in the show notes. Got a great show for you guys tonight. Tonight's guest is a now retired doctor in neuropsychology. He now spends his time split between the Manimal Research and BFRO expedition teams throughout Georgia, Tennessee, and Kentucky. He's part of Doug Hychek's Untold Radio Network and hosts his own YouTube channel called Grasping Bigfoot. We're going to tear into some of his, in his words, ass-puckering Class B encounters, as well as the science behind his research technique. So, if you're ready, let's get into it. So if you will, please give a warm, uncomfortable welcome to Dr. John Baranchok. John, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you for having me. Just by way of clarification, I did a 36-episode YouTube channel and podcast on the book that I wrote, and it's still active and up there, but the podcast is no longer actively recording new shows.
Okay, and the book is entitled?
Research, Grasping Sasquatch, Prepping for Scientific Field Research.
Okay. And how long has that book been out?
About 6 months, I guess, at this point under that name. It's a retitle and reprint and re-edit from my self-published book, which was called Psychological Horizons in Scientific Bigfoot Research, which is why I struggle with the title.
That's a lot of words.
Yeah. And that has been out about 2 years prior to this more recent edition.
Well, while we're talking about that, where can people find this book should they be interested?
Sure. Hangar One Publications carries the book. It also carries some merch to go along with the podcast and the book.
Okay.
And you can also get it on Amazon as well.
Awesome.
Not the merch, just the book.
Gotcha. So, John, we had a wonderful conversation a couple of days ago. When I hung up the phone, I think we were right at 2 hours.
Wow. Should have
And
had the recorder on.
we should have. But so your fascination with this topic, was it something that you were interested in prior to having these ass puckering Class B experiences, or not so much?
Well, not so much. In hindsight, my first Bigfoot experience was probably a decade before this. And I was in my private practice and realized, as a neuropsychologist and pain psychologist, and I was realizing that I was taking care of everybody but me. So I decided to get back into my old hobby of fishing. And as I started hunting for maps on fishing, I came across what I thought was a fishing map, but it turned out to be the BFRO website. Clicked onto Georgia, decided, well, if I can get in on an expedition, why not kill two birds with one stone, fish and doing Bigfoot. And that's how I met Lori Wade. And then I did several of Lori's expeditions, several of Charlie's expeditions, Charlie Raymond, and then more recently spending more time with Manimal Research as well. So never didn't have wasn't thinking of at all of Bigfoot when I had what I think is my first encounter. And years later, that's when I started learning more about it.
Now you've got some tie with Amy Boo from the Project Zoo Book as well, don't you?
Yeah, I'm a member of Project Zoo Book as well, which was, although I'm not one of them, a lot of people, a lot of scientific researchers don't necessarily want their name associated with Bigfoot.
Right.
And Project Zoo Book is kind of to create a safe space for them to be able to learn more and find more and do research on Bigfoot while kind of remaining anonymous.
Well, I want to do an episode with Amy Boo about Project Zoo Book specifically. So that project is giving anonymity to the scientific academia that wants to be involved with it without necessarily being outed for having a belief or having to face the music, as it were, with the skeptics.
Yeah.
That,
and Amy's
what a great idea to come up with that.
Amy's just one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. And we meet about once a month and have guests or specific topics, sharing research.
Yeah, she's a wonderful soul. I really enjoy talking with her. So John, let's get into the meat and potatoes of your experiences. And then I really enjoyed the part of our conversation the other night where we started talking about the different theories and the scientific aspects of what you're doing.
Sure. The meat and potatoes, as in my experiences, is that what you're talking about? Yeah. Okay. So, the very first expedition I went on, I'm not going to share the story because it's a long and boring story, but suffice it to say that I heard a Bigfoot yell above some coyotes that particular night. And then went out. Probably one of the most exciting encounters I had was up in Tennessee. And for those who haven't been on an expedition, there can be anywhere from 20 to 50 people in a large group. And then we break down into groups of 3 to 6 and go out and do our expeditions. And so I was involved in a group of a group with 15 people, three groups of four and a group of three. And because they pre-scout to get to this area, we had to ford some streams that they had bridges set up, used pallets to set up some bridges and ropes. So we had to ford about three streams to get onto firm ground.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
And then we had a hike up a good halfway, 3/4 of the way up this hill, this mountain, and there was an old cabin there. The gentleman that built that cabin was looking to avoid consignment during the Civil War. So we had a group of 3 people stay at the cabin, and then 3 groups of 4 dispersed onto the mountain. One went down lower on the mountain, and then I was in 1 or 2 groups that went higher up the mountain. We had to hike up a slippery game trail to get from the mountain to the main fire road. And the fire road hadn't been trimmed for some time. And so as we're walking up there, it was 2 experienced Bigfooters, Greg Ogilvy and, boy, I'm having trouble with names today. Greg Ogilvy and George, and then myself was one of the newbies and rookies, and a guy by the name of Dan Kegley. It was also one of his first expeditions. So we hiked up the fire road in a single line, and as we were hiking, the forest was extremely quiet. It had rained the night before, so you could hear the water running off the rocks and the leaves of the trees. You could hear the trees rustling in the wind, but otherwise you couldn't hear any other animal life. You couldn't hear chipmunks or squirrels rustling in the leaves. We didn't see any turkey activity. We didn't see any deer activity. It was as if it was lifeless, and we had that silence that you hear of, except for the leaves and running rainwater. So I asked George, I said, George, is this the kind of silence you're talking about when, George Wrigley, is this the kind of silence you're talking about when, there's a Bigfoot in the area? And he said, well, this silence, but you usually have a sense of being watched, kind of that your hair standing up on the neck, or some people call it your spidey senses kind of tingle. So he didn't think that this silence was anything unique. So we kept hiking, and the plan was for one group to go in one direction on the fire road and the other group to go on the other. And we were going to meet halfway around behind the back of the mountain. Well, we hiked for a couple hours, couldn't get a hold of the other group, and didn't come across the other group. So we finally got a hold of them on the walkie-talkie, and somehow we took the wrong turn, and we weren't ever going to meet them. So we decided to call it a hike.
Let me just jump in here. So the
Sure.
intention was for you guys to at some point cross, but you had got turned around, and inevitably there was no way that was going to happen.
Exactly. So we finally got a hold of them over the walkie-talkie, And lo and behold, they had signs of pigs rooting on the fire road with their nose, tearing up the ground. They scared roosting turkeys on the ground, roosting turkeys from the trees, and trees on the turkeys on the ground. They saw deer. They had all the wildlife we thought we'd be seeing, but we didn't have any sign of that. They had it all. So we didn't think much about that. I couldn't tell you how far apart it was because we stopped before reaching the backside of the mountain when we realized we weren't going to meet them. So I really don't know, to be honest with you. So we start walking home, or not home, but back down the fire road we had just hiked up. And these guys got a kick out of it when I talk about hypnosis and what kind of things you can do with hypnosis and how that could be related to Bigfoot phenomena.
Hello, it is Ryan, and we could all use an extra bright spot in our day, couldn't we? Just to make up for things like sitting in traffic, doing the dishes, counting your steps, all the mundane stuff. That is why I'm such a big fan of Chumba Casino. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere with daily bonuses. That should brighten your day a little. Actually, a lot. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com. That's ChumbaCasino.com.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Some of it. And I was talking about some aspect of it, and I was second in line, single file, going down the hill. And when I made this comment, I can't even tell you what comment it was, but my buddy in front of me, George, he stopped in his tracks, pivoted on his heel, and took a step or two towards me before I stopped, and he said, "Ja," and all he got out was the first syllable of my name, and all of a sudden, boom, this huge bomb, it was like this huge bomb went off over our heads, but it was a tree pushover, or at that point, a tree could have fallen, but it cracked and exploded like a bomb went out over our heads. And of course, we immediately started looking around, and we were near the cabin at this point. The folks at the cabin radioed up, "Did you hear that tree fall or that tree pushover?" We said, "Hell yeah, it was just about on top of our heads." So we were still looking up, and after the tree explosion, you could hear things tumbling down the hill. It sounded like rocks and logs were tumbling, boulder rocks and logs were tumbling down the hill towards us. And George and I skedaddled towards the front a little bit. Greg Ogilvy, he was last in line. He skittered towards the back. And Dan Kegley, God bless him, he just reached and pulled for his K-bar knife, his military knife, and pivoted on his head, and was up looking up the hill, getting ready to take on what was ever coming our way. That was brave. Yeah, I've since then nicknamed him Braveheart, because all three of us were otherwise looking to skedaddle and get out of there, and he just decided to turn and face what was ever coming down the hill. And nothing came down the hill. We were expecting giant boulders and trees and stones. Nothing came down the hill except a huge cloud of loam. Now, loam is the soil you get out of if you have like a mulch pile. It's real rich, and it has a very distinctive odor.
Yeah, very airy and lightweight.
Yes. And I smelled the loam before I saw it. And then as I was looking up the hill for anything else coming down, I saw the little particles of loam falling down in the air. So as you're to do on a BFRO expedition, we tried to debunk and explain away what that could have been. And of course, one of the obvious possibilities was trees. But this thing went on for, it seemed longer, but George had his recorder on, and it was 14 seconds of this landslide sound. And if it was a good recording, I'd share it with you, but it in no way, shape, or form conveys the intensity of that sound.
But
And
nevertheless, it does give you something to go back and listen to and help insert yourself back into that position where you
right,
remember exactly what was going on.
yeah, 14 seconds sounded much too short. Seemed like it took a much longer time, but that's all there was to it. So we spent about another 30, 40 minutes trying to debunk it, looking up the hill, looking for Bigfoot, looking for whatever. We couldn't find a thing. We were probably 4 of the oldest in the expedition party, but nonetheless, we decided, and this happened about 3:00 in the morning. We decided we were going to come back the next day and case it out more closely. So we put 2 long vertical sticks, stuck them into the ground to make an X so we could get right back to that exact location. Well, the next morning, all 4 of us were sore as all get out. So we were hurting too bad to go up there. But a young man just fresh out of the military and big into hunting, his last name was Mixon. He said, well, I'm going to go up there. So he goes up there, and I'll be darned, real close to where we made that X with the sticks, he finds a full adult print, a castable print. He was new to the situation, so he didn't know how to cast one. So he came all the way back down the mountain, all the way back to base camp, our true base camp, not the cabin, and got somebody that knew how to cast, and then went back up there, back up to the cabin, back up the deer trail, up to the fire road, up to where we heard the landslide or the bluff charge. And oh gee, I skipped a part of the story. At any rate, they cast that print, and while the print was drying, the cast was drying, they found a partial print on the drop-off side of the fire road and a fresh tree bark tear 15 inches or 15 feet up the tree. And when they looked down over the drop off, about 10 feet down, it plateaued off into a flat. And they saw a bunch of infant and juvenile prints there. Well, that night, after we couldn't after we couldn't figure out why we had that landslide experience, we started walking back down to the trail, and just as we got to the head of the deer trail, the small slippery slope down to the cabin, the folks at the cabin radioed up and said, "Are you guys coming down the fire road or the deer trail?" "Well, we're on the fire road. We're just getting ready to come down the deer trail." 10-4. We start down the deer trail, and I mean, it was like slippery clay going down that thing. It was like ice almost. And they radio up again, and we're all being real careful not to fall as we go down this trail. They radio up again, and they said, are you on the deer trail or are you on the fire road? We said, we're on the deer trail now. Why do you keep calling us? Well, when you were on the fire road, there were either red eye shine or red spheres of some kind following you about 30 to 40 yards behind you. And now that you're on the deer trail, the same thing is happening. We're seeing either red eye shine or spheres behind you, following you down the deer trail. So we all pivoted and shined our light up the trail. We couldn't see a thing. So we walked the rest of the way down the trail, and we're going to rest for about 15 minutes just to get our wind before we walk down the other half of the mountain and forded those streams to get in our cars to get to the main base camp. And so as we're sitting outside this cabin, just looking out into the forest across from where the deer trail was, we just came down, all of a sudden somebody said, look at that red light. And I looked, I didn't see a thing. And then somebody else said, look, there's one over there. And I looked over there and I caught that one, just a little red eye, what looked like a red eye popping out from behind a tree. And the next thing you knew it, other people were saying, look at that one, look at that one, look at that one. The whole forest was lighting up, not the whole forest, but a good 100-yard stretch of forest.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Was lighting up with red eye shine peepers. One red eye would pop out from behind a tree and pop back in, pop out from the other side of the tree, pop back in. And this was going on over like 100-yard stretch. Again, we were so excited we failed to count, but I'd say there were at least 24 sets of eyes kind of peeping on us. Never did we see an adult eyes stepping out from behind a tree. These were all real close to the ground or just a few feet up off the ground.
So,
and small eyes.
Let me get some clarification here. Did you ever see two together that would indicate like an entire head was sticking out? Where you were seeing both eyes at the same time, or were they always one or the other?
It was personally for me, it was one or the other. I don't recall anyone saying they saw both eyes. Everybody was pointing to just one eye at a time.
So was there any illumination from you, the viewers? Was there any illumination going out towards the woods that would...
Good question. Because, eye glow versus eye shine.
Right.
And I've been saying eye glow because it was still that night, the moon was blocked completely. There was cloud cover over all the sky. It was real dark. Hiking up there, we turned our lights out and you couldn't see your finger in front of your nose. So there was no other visible illumination. And so that made me think it's eye glow. When I recently posted that, somebody made a pretty good point, though. What if there was a spectrum of light going on that humans can't see, but could have still been reflecting and causing eye shine? I can't dispute that possibility, but all the human eye was seeing was dark, and then these red peepers all over the forest. So all 15 of us sat there for 20, 25 minutes, and just it was almost like a big ass Christmas tree laying on its side, and they just kept peeping and peeping and peeping, and then gradually it died down and stopped, and then we walked away back down the mountain.
When you
And
guys, can you give me a rough idea what was the distance between you, the viewers, and the eyes?
I'd say about 50 yards,
Okay,
if that.
so not too terribly far.
Not too
Did
terribly.
any of you ever witness like a blinking action where they would just blink and you would lose sight of the redness for a split second?
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes when they'd peep out on the side, they'd blink. They assuming it would be their eyelids, and they could go out that way as well. They'd blink out that way. And so it was the next morning then, I think his name's Daniel Mixon, when Mr. Mixon went up and found this right at the location where he X marked the spot. He found the footprint that they casted. That footprint was 17 and a half inches long. And the clarity of it was incredible. You could see the dermal ridges. You could see the mid-tarsal break. 4 out of the 5 toes, you could see the individual joints in the toes. On the great toe, it was like you saw 2 joints. It was missing a joint, and then you saw the final great toe joint, so that you had the impression of the great toe, nothing, and then you saw the bones for the next 2 down to the body of the foot. And this was the first. I had seen Dr. Meldrum's recasts, but this was the first actual cast that I had seen. It just amazed me, the detail that was in that thing. And it was like, so much so, it was almost like looking like an X-ray, that the X-ray machine moved and missed that little chunk of the great toe, but everything else was intact. It was like looking at an X-ray almost.
The casts are a very interesting thing, and some of them I've got Patty back here. I've got the Grays Harbor back here. I have some others that I don't have room on the wall for. And to look at a cast, especially one that has been either found by yourself or that has been confirmed by experts in the field, such as Jeff Meldrum. To look at a cast, essentially you're looking at a negative. And when you look at it, there's some quality to it that you lose from actually seeing the print in the ground. And I've not seen a print in the ground, but I can tell you this. I wanted very much to see what an accurate representation of this Grays Harbor, because that's almost too perfect of a cast. So I did a little experiment myself. I spent $40 on some silicone rubber, and I made a mold from that cast. And when I pulled that silicone off, when I removed that, and I was able to look at the cast or the silicone, now I was looking at what the print actually looked like in the ground. Granted, it's blue, but I was able to, it brings out so much more definition and so much more. I mean, obviously when you hold a cast, I mean, it's 3D, but when you can actually see what that impression looked like in the ground, then it makes sense. Just to stand there and look at one of these, it's kind of discombobulating. But when you see what that looked like as an impression, it is significantly more awe-inspiring.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I I don't know what to say. It's just seeing that cast was incredible. The first true one I had actually saw, and so
I'm interested. Did they ever cast any of the juveniles or the infants?
no, you would have had to belay down to that flat, and there wasn't anyone too keen to belay down there and spend time down there casting all the footprints they saw down there.
So many people, whether they're a weekend warrior or a one-time, hey, let's go see if we can find something. Man, if there's one thing you're going to put in your backpack, make sure you're carrying a liter of water and a bag of perfect cast. Just, yeah, it's 2.5 pounds plus the weight of the water. So what? Put it in your backpack. If you find something, what a perfect opportunity to be able to cast something.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember the name of. I had the name in my head earlier. The name of the product they use, but it was a white, not Pasteur of Paris, but there's some other word. Hydrocal.
Yeah, Hydrocal. That's
what,
made. I mean, that was used in the dental industry.
mm-hmm.
The Perfect Cast brand is, I mean, that's their advertisement is it's either 5 or 10 times stronger than plaster of Paris. So anytime I've ever made a cast, I choose to use that. I had one person send me the first print of Patty back here. Somebody was very nice and sent it to me free of charge. But it was a very sandy mix and it was very thin. And when I got it in the mail, it was just crumbled to pieces. It was like,
Oh no.
oh,
Oh no. Well, and the good news now, just a little plug for a friend. There's a podcast out there. David Zygan has a podcast out there called Bigfoot Forensics, and he is an active crime scene investigator. And so he's getting some of these older casts and looking at new casts, and he specializes in analyzing the authenticity of crime scene casts, be they footprints, handprints, tire tracks. And he's bringing that to the Bigfoot community, and I think that's a good thing.
that sounds like that's a in addition to what Jeff Meldrum brings to the table, where his is more the anthropology and
Right.
The structural stuff, the forensic side of things. Put those two together, and they say there's no evidence, and yet you can find 100 podcasts plus where people are talking about the evidence that's been found, and you can find on any given day 100 different people who are talking about their eyewitness encounters or their Class B ass puckering encounters. That to say that there's no evidence, it's just it's kind of maddening. I think we talked a couple of days ago. I think I told you that I kind of rededicated my podcast and my convictions to my first two loves, which are Bigfoot and UFOs. And it's exciting and it's great and it's wonderful. All the stuff that's out about UFOs, UAPs, whatever new 3-letter word they're calling them now, for whatever reasons. All of the attention that's being brought to that, and it should be. I agree, it should be, but to have this, which has as much evidence and probably even a little bit more substantial, to just continue to be ignored and poo-pooed, and I don't know. They got whistleblowers coming forward with, having worked for the government or agencies and stuff like that. And yet, we still have academics who have to go to Project Zoo Book because they don't want to face the ridicule for
stigma. Yeah.
Yeah.
I personally, so if the Patterson-Gimlin film didn't do it, I personally don't think any photo or video or casts, for that matter, are ever going to amount to the proof that science is asking us for to prove that they're a species. I mean, the deck, and to a big degree, that's not fair. The deck is stacked against us because other endangered species or rare species, once they got the video from a naturalist, that's it. It's all said and done. That species exists. But it doesn't work that way with Bigfoot. We have some legitimate videos put out by quality people, credible people, and yet it's still not enough. And so, I think at some point we've got to move on. And that was the inspiration behind my book. I've heard it. If I've heard it once, I've heard it 30 times around campfires. We've got to do something different, everybody says. But yet everybody continues to take pictures, do recordings, casts.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Pictures of footprints. And what I'm trying to get people to understand and bring to the table is that as science evolves, as most of the, quote, hard sciences evolve, we started with observation. We started with observational science. Isaac Newton saw that apple fall from the tree. Well, he didn't then just walk around for the next 30 to 40 years pointing out that apples fall from trees. He started doing experiments with things falling and using that data to prove the existence of gravity. And that's kind of where I see Bigfoot research being at. We're on that precipice whereby simple, not even simple, even complex observational science isn't going to cut it. We need to get out into the field and start designing experiments and manipulating independent variables and stop relying solely on recordings, pictures, photos. We've got to manipulate some independent variables and get some numeric statistics and let the statistics show us the answers rather than what happens now, which right now, what it seems happens is opinions and assumptions, and everybody gets into a pissing contest about whether it's authentic or not, real or not. And it all boils down to opinions. And the problem with that is our opinions are based on our perception, what we perceive. And what we perceive isn't always going to be reality or realistic. What we perceive is influenced by our life experiences. Pull a piece of bluegrass out and show somebody a piece of Kentucky bluegrass. Is this color green, blue? What's this color? You're going to get different answers from people depending on their life experiences. And so the when you pick up a hot stick, as that signal travels up your nerves into your spinal cord, up your neck, all that until it reaches your brain is called sensation. The second that signal registers on your brain and registers pain, that's called perception. And again, we are biased machines because our perception depends on our upbringing and what people have taught us and raised us. And you can perceive, it's a cruel joke, but I've seen it done. Putting people with their backs to the fire so they can feel the heat of the fire, and then they bring a piece of metal towards their back till it feels real hot. Bring a piece of metal back to their back until it feels hot, kind of hazing kind of stuff. And then the next time, tell them, okay, here it comes. And rather than a hot glowing ember metal, piece of ice. And they're going to scream as if they just got branded by metal. And here's the thing about placebo. Placebo carries physical changes. People's backs will welt up as if they've actually been burned from that. And they will develop other physical symptoms that go along with that. So my point being, the body responds to placebo as if it really happened. And so that's just one example of how our perceptual abilities, our perception, bias our experiences about how we interpret what we see or feel.
Well, isn't your brain creating a physiological response to what it is assuming is happening?
Yes, to that perception. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know if I did. I posted it up. I don't have all I've got is my personal site. I don't have a site you come and join, that kind of thing. But I posted up an experiment whereby the guy was sitting at a table. They had his chest covered except for a rubber arm sticking out. Have you seen that? And then they've got a board between the rubber arm and his actual right arm. And when they hit that rubber arm, they even talk him through, this is rubber, you shouldn't feel this. They hit that right arm, he feels it, the right rubber arm, he feels that in his actual arm, and screams, ow. And so, yeah, perception. It's it's a challenge to tease out, and it presents a huge challenge to being objective in observational field research. Excuse me.
So, BFRO. I've got a couple of questions, and I want to ask you since you're involved with them. And it's not to throw shade at them at all, but I have spoke with a specific BFRO investigator in the state of Michigan. And I've often heard that there is some degree of sanitation that takes place in reports once filed there may be things that are omitted before it actually goes into the BFRO website. He confirmed that for me. Is that standard practice to your knowledge? And if so, is there a good reason for it, or is it specifically designed to not have to tackle the weird stuff?
Yeah. Well, I know there's a spoken rule that we don't put woo experiences. We don't post woo sightings on that. And in fact, that's about all I can tell you when it comes to sanitation, because I've never been like one of the investigators who go out on to take a report, like you saw on Finding Bigfoot, when they go out and query the person who had the sighting and check out where they had the sighting and try and determine whether it was a Bigfoot or not. I've never been one of those people who do that. So I've seen it done by one of the best, but so I honestly don't know the answer to your question about what else might be sanitized. I just know that there was a standing policy to not include woo kind of report.
It was there were two specific things. One was woo, and two was to downplay or minimize any kind of overtly violent encounters.
Wow. I hadn't heard that one. But now granted, I haven't had a Class A, what I would call a pure Class A experience. And the story I just told and your other story, the other butt puckering story I got, it involved aggressive behavior enough to make me feel threatened, but I can't say I've ever been assaulted or something bad happen.
Before we get into that other ass puckering encounter, having had time to deal with that and live with it and rethink it and look back on it, and I assume it's been a good deal of time since it's happened. The aggressiveness of that encounter, do you view it as an act of aggression, intimidation, or do you think maybe that it was something that just was so in your face that was your reaction to it? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the what I call the landslide story, or in hindsight, the bluff charge story. I don't know if I'd call it aggression, but maybe intimidation would be a better word. It was intimidating. I mean, 3 out of the 4 of us scattered like cockroaches when the lights come on, and only Braveheart turned and faced the music that was coming down the hill. So it was intimidating. But honestly, when it first started happening, the intimidation wasn't about being attacked by a Sasquatch. The intimidation was about a landslide coming. We were anticipating having to dodge these big boulders rolling down the mountain.
And it's interesting. You said that nothing came down other than the loam.
The loam,
right? So I've got two thoughts about that. So one, the loam could have been in addition to a rotted tree, right? Because when a tree is super rotted and dried out, it almost turns powdery, so that could have been part of it. But if there's truth to finding the print of the adult at 17 and a half inches, and then finding numerous infant and juvenile prints, I guess, like, what were the lighting conditions at the time that happened?
When the bluff charge happened,
Yeah.
it was very dark, the overcast night.
So it was dark already. My thought goes to what you thought you heard. Could that possibly have been daddy or mama and a bunch of children just all making all kinds of racket? To me, kicking, a bunch of bodies kicking up the loam into the air would make more sense than just it coming from who God knows what.
Sure. There was a cracking sense to the tree pushover, which lends itself to that label. It wasn't like something got pushed over by the roots. You could hear the splintering of the tree being pushed over. And yeah, as we've tried to sort it out, the four of us have talked on multiple occasions separately. It could have been mom or dad, or just mom and dad just kicking up the leaves, making all kinds of sound. I think what happened was we just happened to stop either at the nursery or the playground. I think that plateau about 10 foot down, I think, was either a nursery or a playground. And just by coincidence, we happened to stop close enough to it that they didn't want us around it. The irony of it was that it made us stay. If they hadn't done that, we wouldn't have stayed. We would have just walked on by and walked on down the deer trail. But it made us stay an extra half hour trying to figure out just what happened. So it didn't quite go the way it was intended to go from a Bigfoot perspective. But yeah, that brings me back to your question about aggressiveness and versus intimidation.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
I think that these creatures, from other reports, if they really wanted to hurt us or injure us, I think it would be a done deal. They seem amazingly accurate in their ability to throw things, push things over. And so, I think it's more of a scare tactic than a desire to attack per se. I think they just want to be left alone.
So John, like, once you decided, once you've had your experiences and you've decided to write this book, Grasping Sasquatch, and when you start getting into the scientific stuff, okay, so everybody's going out with night vision, everybody's going out with gimbals attached to the shoulder pads of their backpacks with a GoPro on it, facing behind them, a la Scott Carpenter.
Scott Carpenter.
You've got people that are going out taking hardwood bats and whacking trees with it. You got people that are, doing hoops and doing screams in the night. Like you were saying earlier, we've got these people that and for the average Joe, those are the only things that are really within reach for us to try to elicit a response, right? Some people are going out there, all they want to do is hear a whoop or a tree knock or a howl, and that's going to satisfy them, right? And they're going to have something to tell the grandkids. But then, and I don't take anything away from that, because I think all of that, whatever level, even the level that I'm at by talking to people who have had experiences, I think those are all valid parts to putting the puzzle together. Any one of them that's not being done isn't helping, right?
Right.
AI is not helping. AI is not helping with giving people the opportunity to create trail cam photographs of things that don't exist. Those things are hurting the problem, or creating a problem and hurting the topic. But like, when you talk about creating and collecting data and information and numbers and being able to crunch things together to point, what kind of stuff are you talking about that is different than what the average Joe is going out and doing?
Yeah. Not much. It's not so much different stuff. It's taking what we're doing with that stuff one step further. I mean, the creature is obviously elusive, and I hope I don't offend anybody when I say creature. It could be a creature. God only knows what it could be. But, huh? Yeah, yeah. But so yeah, it's a slippery slope downhill if you're going out there and you're targeting the being itself, because they are elusive. You're not likely to get that photograph that you're looking for or that video. But through expeditions, I can only think of one expedition that I was on, and it was just raining so hard. You really couldn't get out to do much. But I can only think of one expedition that I've been on where somebody didn't find something, be it a footprint or footprints, be it stone clacks, be it howls, be it tree knocks. The phenomena that Bigfoot produces is much more prevalent and available than Bigfoot itself. And so, what's one of the main criticisms? Take tree knocks. Well, how do you know that that's just not humans making those knocks with their baseball bats or whatever the case may be? So you could set up an experiment with tree knocks. So you go to an area, maybe in the past, where you've gotten tree knocks in reply, and you set up an experimental protocol where you decide in advance you're going to make a single tree knock or 2 tree knocks or 3. I don't see much point going beyond 3. And you make those tree knocks, and then you wait a predetermined amount of time, say 15, 20 minutes. And then if you didn't get anything within 15 to 20 minutes, you record 0. you can make another tree knock in that area, or you go to yet another hot spot that you believe is a hot spot for tree knocks and follow that procedure. So, you're tapping, and preferably this is done in a deeper forest area. This isn't done from your campsite. This is done where you go deep into the woods. And you basically keep track of how many non-responses you got, no tree knocks back, and how many tree knocks you got back for each of your own tree knocks. And so, in essence, you're measuring Bigfootness or Bigfoot's tendency to knock on trees in that area. Then you go to a park where there's no Bigfoot, where all you have is human element. Maybe a little, in some of these small towns, they've got a little park in the plaza with some picnic benches, maybe a grandstand and grass. And you go downtown and you make tree knocks. And you follow that same protocol you did for when you were in the Bigfoot area. But now you're in the human area, and what you're tapping into is the essence of human behavior and response to a tree knock, as opposed to when you were up in the woods, deep in the woods, you were tapping into the essence of Bigfoot behavior. So you keep track of how many responses you get back from the human area compared to no responses. And you do that the same with Bigfoot. And then you compare your numbers.
Now, is this something like in your mind's eye, is this something that could become automated? Because so to me, I'm thinking, okay, you're going to have to do it to see how active they are in the morning hours and then midday hours. And then, around dusk. And then again in the dark of deep night.
Mm-hmm.
So, like when, going back to the medical profession, if they're doing studies on 1,000 people, 2,000 people, 10,000 people, whether it's, the efficacy of a vaccine or whatever, then you always have the placebo, which is the control for nothingness, basically. I get what you're saying, and I agree with you 100% that would be the best way to do it. But how in the world would you manage manpower and being able to do that consistently all times of the day? And
yeah, you need a team, number one. Automating it is an interesting proposition, because depending on how refined you want to get, does a piece of wood, how many times can you hit a piece of wood against another piece of wood for it to make the same resonant sound
hardly ever.
Right.
Ever.
So that's what
the best you could do is take, and I've gotten pushback on this from some people, and
mm-hmm.
But you take 2 old hardwood baseball bats, and whack those 2 together. If you hit the wrong tree, if the bark isn't right, it's
Lots of variables.
yeah, it's not going to sound like what you're hearing off in the distance. And we brought this up while we were talking the other night, and that's why I kind of brought up kind of my bonker theory that, you know, in this, I guess maybe this extends into the woo a little bit, but you know, I've done a number of haunted location investigations. And something that you hear a lot in a haunted location is you'll hear knocks, whether it be on the wall or it may sound like it's coming from a table or a credenza, you know, that's off in the corner, but you'll hear knocks. You'll hear, you'll see, excuse me, you'll see, and I'm not talking about orbs in that you're taking a flash photo at night in a dusty room where you're getting the dust reflecting the light. I'm talking about like a legitimate class A orb that is self-lit and comes out of nowhere and then goes away. You know, how many people have you heard tell encounters where they're seeing lights in the woods? You know, not fireflies, but orbs of light in the woods, either pre or post Bigfoot experience. The knocking on the walls. You know, people talk about mind speak, and I mean, I get that there's a difference, but how much of a difference is there between that and getting an EVP recording of a voice that shows up on a tape, but was not audible to the people that were in the area when it was captured? So, you know, it makes me seriously ponder the idea that, you know, since nobody has any photographs or video evidence of a Sasquatch with a large tree, a large limb of a tree smacking another tree to make that noise. What if that sound is a peripheral effect of them coming into our perception, our ability to perceive them? You know, I'm not saying that Bigfoot are you know, the golden retrievers for extraterrestrials. That's not what I'm saying. They might be. I doubt that they are, but you know, so much of the paranormal has things that overlap with Bigfoot experiences that it makes me wonder. I mean, are they related? Not in the sense that they're all of the same or come from the same, but are these things coming into our perception in the same way?
I think that's an interesting hypothesis. I'm sitting here trying to think how you could tease that out experimentally. Kind of like when an airplane or a jet breaks the sound barrier, you hear the sonic boom. Kind of like if Bigfoot's popping through a dimension or popping into vision.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Could that tree knock be that?
And it also plays into another crackpot theory of mine is, you know, you hear people talk about the cloaking ability, right? You hear people that don't necessarily say cloaking, but they'll have an eyes on, and the Bigfoot will turn and take one step away, and then they're gone. You know, they've blended so well that they can't be noticed anymore. You know, I was explaining to you from a early episode of mine where I believe that I got zapped by a sound that was just earth shaking. It was so loud. But then my recording equipment didn't catch anything other than this tiny little whoo. And then we started talking about infrasound. And if these things, infrasound seems to be a pretty big topic when it comes to these things. And, you know, even when you go to Scott Nelson breaking down the Sierra sounds, you know, he talks about their vocal modality and the attributes that they have vocally, and being able to hit frequencies that are above the human range and well below the human range. So if they can produce an infrasonic frequency, what is the possibility that the frequency or vibration that they can produce from their vocals could alter our ability to perceive them through our eyes? Because like we were talking, it talked about some gentleman that did an experiment in Stonehenge with different frequencies bouncing off the monolithic stones. And the one guy, he had to quit the experiment. He couldn't go on because it was making him ill. But one of the things that he was talking about, the bad side effects, were that his vision was becoming blurred and he was getting very confused about his surroundings. You know, and if maybe they're not cloaking, maybe they're just able to affect us in a manner that makes us not able to perceive them as well as we should.
Sure. Or maybe they can do that through telepathy as well. Yeah, I mean, I think these are good questions to answer, to take a look at and try and figure out experimentally. To the infrasound point, you're probably aware of it. Maybe not all your listeners are, but elephants can communicate 10 miles distant from each other using infrasound that travels under the ground, and then the distant herd can pick up that infrasound on the pads of their feet, and they can communicate with each other 10 miles apart using infrasound. Zookeepers have to be rotated out of their responsibilities for cleaning the elephants' enclosure and washing elephants, because they produce so much infrasound. If these keepers are around it for too long, they start getting sick.
Yeah. Were you aware that there, I believe it was in Africa, there was a small community that the elephants had not been in that area for a long while, and for whatever reason they came back, and during the time that the elephants started to propagate that area again, suicides in that small community started to skyrocket.
Wow.
And they determined that the cause was the constant exposure to the infrasound from the herd of elephants.
Interesting. So I've never seen it, but I'm told that chronic infrasound.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Can turn our insides into gelatin, a gelatinous-like tissue from the structured tissue that it is. I don't know if that's true or an old wives' tale. Yeah. But one of the tests of that, and I discovered this when I was doing my research. You know what else makes infrasound? Trucks, 18-wheelers. The sound of their tread and their motor on the road for these long haul truckers produce infrasound. And it would be interesting to do a study, even if it's just epidemiological, and look at the health issues that arise from truckers, and see how it affects different organ systems in the body. Because certainly the elephant tenders, that's having that all infrasounding is having an impact on their health, impact on their organs. But we've never, not that I've gone out looking, but I've never heard of anything like that with truck drivers. But I do know it's a fact that the 18-wheelers produce infrasound.
That's interesting. I can say from a personal note, I did a short stint in my life, almost 3 years to the day, where I was an overnight dispatch manager for an expediting company, and I can tell you that the healthcare that the company provided for the truckers, the drivers themselves, was significantly better and more encompassing than the normal office workers.
Interesting.
And the health problems that these over the road truckers had was astounding. I don't know that I ever saw maybe one or two of them that would come into our cross dock that actually looked like healthy people.
Interesting.
Fast food, sitting 10 hours a day, no exercise, all valid things. But I never would have considered the possibility of them having health issues from infrasound. That's interesting.
Yeah. And infrasound zapping, again, it seems to happen to a fair number of people. But again, all we've got is the experiential evidence. And there's got to be some way to harness some other kind of data. And and don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that observational experiential evidence needs to be set aside. Observational and experiential evidence is the foundation upon which all sciences are built. Observational science points to the experimental science and tells it where it needs to go and what experiments do you need to run. And so we got to work more hand in hand with each other, and let the observational and experiential science kind of point the finger or guide us to frame up the experimental science. The experiential science is the foundation, and now we've got to frame up the house of Bigfoot using experimental science. That's a pretty tough sell, though, and I'm not going to go into the politics or economics of that, but it's hard to convince people to do something different. People get into doing what they've been taught and what they know, and it's hard to change. It becomes hard to change that mentality.
Well, especially if you're somebody who has an area that if you do X, Y, and Z, you'll get A, B, and C to happen. And you're never going to change that person and tell them, okay, stop doing XYZ. Now I want you to do QRS, because they can invite any one of their friends. They can invite any expedition member, any team out there, and say, okay, I'm going to do this, and you're going to get that, and many times they're able to do that. Why would they want to give up being able to get a response, or what they consider to be a response, in order to change and maybe not get anything anymore? So I mean, I get the pushback on not wanting to change, but then you run into people that are so steadfast in their belief that they are the only one that knows the right thing to do. And you're going to come in here with a couple of newfangled scientific ideas, and they're going to be like, no, that's horseshit. We're not going to do that. I know. Well, you don't, and unfortunately, more times than not, these guys are weekend warriors who, are doing nothing more than strapping a GoPro to their chest and walking out in a metro park someplace,
Yeah.
Where do you,
Well,
are we any closer? Are we any closer?
I must admit, I'm probably guilty of I'm probably one of the guys that you just described that knows. I'm sure there are times when my energy comes off that way, simply because I know we've been spinning our wheels. We're coming up on 50 years with the photographs, with the footprints, with the casts, and we're no closer now than we were back in Patty's day, And so when you do look, I gave the example of physics and gravity. The hard sciences, they don't just stick with the observations. They use the observations as a springboard to run experiments and do experiments based on those observations. And so I got to say, I know that until we move to a more experimental model, we're just going to continue to spin our wheels the way we have been for the last 40, 50 years, because we're not getting any closer to evidence that science would accept. We've already been taught from the Patterson-Gimlin film that video, photographs, casts, pictures of prints, that's going to be rejected by science. It's been done once. And so I think we really believe we've got to give scientists, the true scientific community, something they can get their teeth into. And what they can get their teeth into is numbers. The universal language of science is math. And so we've got to, it's upon us as the ones trying to prove things, the responsibility to get that proof in a format or a form that science can digest and understand. That onus is on us. And so, we've got to figure out a way to get to some numbers. We've got to be able to say things like, yeah, there were significantly more Bigfoot knocks there were significantly more knocks in the Bigfoot area when we did tree knocks than when we did them in the human area. So, if you get that kind of finding repeated, you're ruling out human intervention being the primary source of those tree knocks back in the woods. And here's the t-test. Here's the statistical analysis that tells you there was a significant difference between the responses from humans and the responses from the Bigfoot area. So I think we've got to be able to give them.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Mathematical and statistical data, because that's going to be the language that they speak. The big push is, of course, get a full genome, the DNA. Well, I'm not going to get into the Ketchum study, but that wasn't good enough by a lot of counts. A lot of other hair sample studies in other countries have been done, and it's always been a known species. Okay. So, but the reason
it comes back and showing human.
Yeah.
But, again, I don't know. We haven't discussed this at all prior or during, as far as what you think they are, more akin to a wild animal, more akin to something closer related to us. I'll give you mine first. Simply from my experience of talking to people who have had eyes on encounters or ass puckering class B experiences. These things seem to be very intelligent. Can they balance a checkbook and things like that? No, but in their environment, they seem to be very, very smart. I wonder. I think that these things are a branch of humanity that exists alongside of us and has evolved in its own way. We chose the route of concrete and civilization. They chose the route of Mother Nature and living out under the stars.
Mm-hmm.
But my gut tells me, and I think a lot of it relies on Native American oral tradition about these things, that they are much closer to being a human-like.
Yeah. Well, that's a short conversation for me. Insufficient data to determine is my answer.
But you've got to have a gut, though, don't you? I know you're a doctor. I know you have a medical background, and with that comes scientific. I got to have proof. But you got to have a gut feeling, don't you?
Honestly, when I talk casually, I frequently used words like beast or animal. That's what comes into my vocabulary naturally. But honestly, I'm not sure. It seems to me that the opinions about what they are related to the weight and authority and celebrity of the person advancing that theory. And so, I think the predominating theory is some kind of hominid, relict hominid, whatever the case may be. Certainly, Dr. Meldrum has been highly influential in that work. And so when I look at Wu phenomena and I look at some of the other theories, nothing else has been studied in that much detail or with that much rigor as the anthropomorphical data out there. So how does just the volume of that research, that the fact that there's been more research in that one area compared to other areas, how much does that cause people to lean towards that opinion, you know? And not to mention, the challenges when you get into paranormal research. It's a lot more intangible than a footprint or a foot cast, and so that presents a unique challenge.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
But
and even that in itself, a paranormal experience going into a haunted location, what you're perceiving, what you're experiencing is you're forming an opinion of it based on how you grew up, what your religious background was, and exactly what you're talking about. So yeah, I mean, I can see.
So honestly, I really don't know. I really don't know, because I can't. So many flesh and blood researchers just offhand dismiss woo and paranormal experiences, and I think that's wrong. That's like, you want to explore something, and you got to circle this big that needs to be explored, but because that circle includes things that we can't possibly fathom or is out of our worldview, we're just going to take and look at this much of that circle. And so I think we do selective sampling so that we don't necessarily get the full picture that's out there.
Which really really gets to me, because since 2017, UFOs, UAPs, extraterrestrials, ultra-terrestrials, interdimensionals have been almost worn out. It's so part of everyday conversation now. I mean, at least in my life it is. But on news and different outlets, if that's not batshit crazy, that those things have become common to talk about, but yet this is still a taboo thing, and it makes me wonder: is it because is I hate conspiracy theories, but I love them. It's like, are these things too close to being us that they'll never entertain the idea that there could be a wild feral human living in these woods? Because then what do we have to give them rights? Do we have to protect them and give them a space to live? And can we not encroach on their property anymore? And do we have to stop logging? And who the hell is going to want to buy camping equipment when they find out there's a 900-pound, 10-foot tall massive beast out there that could tear you from limb to limb if you get around their babies, all these different things. And it's like, when you say it out loud, it's like, it's fucking crazy shit. I wish I wouldn't have said that, but I don't.
It's hard to know. It's hard to get an objective opinion as well, because that's what mostly we've got is opinions. I met somebody who I'll keep anonymous, but he's been doing research for a long, long time. And he told me that Bigfoot is known as unidentified species number 7, according to government documents. Yeah. So he said, well, the government knows, because I asked him why, because he has some incredible footage. Why don't you share some of this footage? said, well, we know the government knows, and we know the government has a body. It's unidentified species number 7. So what's, I just do my research for myself. What's the point of proving it to the masses at all? And so he doesn't. Some of the most incredible Bigfoot film I've ever seen, and most convincing, but he doesn't bring it to the public's eye because there's no benefit to doing so for him, because all it would bring would be criticism and ridicule. And how with observational research being the gold standard right now, it debates and arguments still do come down to personal opinions and assumptions, because we don't have numeric data that we can analyze and have that data inform the answers to our questions. All we've got is opinions, some better informed than others, but there's not much statistical analysis out there on these things to answer these questions. Looked like you wanted to say something there.
Well, it makes me want to go back to the subject of DNA. All right. So say you get a tissue sample, say you get, something that got hung up on a piece of barbed wire or something, where you've got hair, you've got follicles, you've got a piece of living tissue, that is relatively fresh. Do you think it's possible that you could ever get an objective look at that? Do you think that is there any chance that would be looked at by whatever company you send it to for DNA, that you would ever get an honest answer?
Yeah. Well, I've heard story after story after story of sending tissue out only for it to be lost or destroyed somehow. But I know, and I don't even know the name of the company. I don't know if this person would want it to be announced. But through my network, I do know a company out there that stays on the down low about doing genetic analysis, but is a genetic analysis lab that will reportedly give you an objective result. Melba, in some discussions about her stuff, there's a lot of intrigue about what happened to her data and so on and so forth. So, and I think her studies raise the question of, once it's out of your hands, if you're sending it to an external lab, you can't control what that lab does with that sample, and therefore, know whether it's a valid finding or not. And so you just about either got to know a very reputable DNA lab or be a DNA analyst yourself, to get at the hard answers. As long as we're talking DNA, I guess I'll not take a shot, but bring up the latest panacea, which seems to be environmental DNA. Everybody's getting wound up over environmental DNA after Daniel in England, found some in some ancient ape DNA in one of the forests. And that's cool and that's incredible. The problem with environmental DNA, though, is you can't produce a complete genome. So again, you can only get part of the information, and you're missing a very critical part of it. So, you know, as I understand it, Dr. Ketchum is starting yet another study. That's what I understand, is she's collecting new samples again. So maybe that'll come up better. The gentleman out of North Carolina, Darby Norcutt, is also doing that study. So I don't know what those studies are going to prove or disprove or not. Obviously I'm biased because of my training as a psychologist, but I think sooner or later psychologic science is going to have to be part of the answer. You can see the impact of a feeling.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
The behavior from a feeling, but you can't directly measure a feeling. Okay? You can see the impact of intelligence, but we had to make up intelligence tests for humans to get an IQ score, to tap into intelligence. And just as a sidebar, one of the interesting things when I was doing my research for my book, there's a lot of species-specific, atavistic, inbred genetic behaviors that mimic intelligence, and don't require the higher order gray matter processing that intelligence takes. Be it tribalism. I didn't even know that tribalism was genetically kind of encoded into our DNA, but it's an atavistic behavior. Atavistic meaning species-specific kind of programming in us. I wish I can't get into my file, but I've got a list of about 15 or 20 other things: territoriality, hunger, play, that could explain things before intelligence. I'm not saying I don't think they're intelligent. I'm saying we got to rule out other things before we say for sure they're intelligent, because a lot of other species-specific behaviors can look like intelligence and not be intelligence. But that kind of got me off track. So sooner or later, yes. So in psychology, we've been able to. You can't directly measure or quantify intelligence, emotions, but yet psychology has been able to develop instrumentation to put some numbers on those and get some hard numeric data on that and measure the impact of behavior, or measure the behavior associated with those concepts. And I think that's part of what makes psychology ideal to study Bigfoot, because like intelligence, like other species-specific behaviors, you can't love or emotions. You can see the effect of them, the behavioral manifestations of them, but you can't measure it directly. And that's what we're trying to do with Bigfoot. It's hard for us to get a Bigfoot body or carcass and measure what's going on in their nervous system directly. So we infer certain abilities based on behaviors compared to humans. And for some of these behaviors, there are ways we can quantify and measure those things much in the same way that we didn't know about them in humans. We can use a similar process to get closer to the core thing we're wanting to measure. And so, and even if we got a body, and if it's truly scientific, that's not going to allow us to then say, okay, so now we know that it's Bigfoot making the tree knocks, and we know it's Bigfoot making the whoops, and we know it's Bigfoot's building these structures. There's going to be a tendency to want to say that because in a lot of ways we put the cart before the horse, because we know about all these things. We're attributing them to Bigfoot. Therefore, when we prove Bigfoot, I think people are expecting that to fall in line scientifically. Proving Bigfoot via an autopsy or a body is just the beginning of the process. We're still going to have to link all these phenomena scientifically to Bigfoot, because if we don't, we're still going to be, now we've proven Bigfoot, but that's all we've proven. We haven't proven that they do X, Y, and Z, because all that's been done is observational research about that. And in fact, as you said, not much video out there on tree knocks, the Bigfoot making a tree knock, or stone knocks, or whoops. Janice Carter, I don't know if you recognize her name. Okay. Janice Carter is a good friend of mine. And when we were talking about tree knocks one time, she says they've got trees that are hollowed out, and what they're doing, like you would with a flute or a piccolo, they're blowing across that opening to make that sound. I think tongue clicks and teeth clicks amplified by using hands like a megaphone are coming increasingly in favor to explain the sound of tree knocks. But
so like
being,
creating an additional resonance to the sound.
But we're just doing, no one, to my knowledge, no one's keeping very good track of all this stuff. I've never been on the flats. I've been offered, but it seems like quite a bit to get into, from what I understand. So we've got to move to a technology that's going to allow us to better quantify these phenomena, as we have with human beings, in order to speak really to what's going on. And for me, that's experimentation. It's much more readily available. It's not that tough. The toughest thing about experimental design and statistics is the statistical part. But if you take the time to get a statistical package, it's not that tough to learn. And so there's got to be a shift, I guess. In addition to observational science, we need to increase the amount of experimental science going on and use the observational science to guide us what we need to experiment with. Be it tree knocks, be it howls or whoops. Your notion, I think in my book, maybe it's been so long since I read it, once you read it the first 14 times, editing it kind of all blends together. But, one of the phenomena I've experienced and heard reported a lot is hearing a tree knock As soon as you arrive on site, you pull into the parking lot of a habituation area and you get out of your car, and before you know it, you hear a tree knock. Now, your idea of that, them signaling or being a result, not signaling, but being a result of their presence popping into that area, if you will. I mean, I think that's fascinating. I think that's an interesting hypothesis to look at. Um, in my book, the experiment I describe is different alternating different vehicles, types of vehicles, and different gender drivers in that vehicle to see if that makes a difference in whether you get a tree knock when you arrive on the site. Are they responding to trucks arriving on site and could care less about little cubes and that kind of thing? Or is it happening because a male or a female landed, just came onto the site? And so why do we get tree knocks when the first person arrives onto site? Why is that an ongoing phenomena? That could be readily studied through an experimental design to look at that. So it's about stirring enough interest and I guess thinking about it in that way rather than just taking it for granted. I mean, at this point, a lot of people, I think, just take for granted that, no, that was a Bigfoot knocking.
Yeah.
And
Well, unfortunately, I think you're going to have a lot easier time finding somebody who's going to be excited about going into the woods, doing a whoop or a howl or a wood knock, trying to get something to come back versus the amount of effort that it's going to take to get the kind of hard science and the numbers and the data that you're talking about needing to move this forward.
Boy, haven't I learned that.
John,
that's the reason I stopped continuing with my podcast and my YouTube channel, because it was such a tough sell, and I don't think people are ready.
Yeah. Well, sir, we're up at 2 hours here. We got to start because of technical difficulties, but I think we got a really good, solid show here. Do me a favor, let everybody know again the name of your book and where they can get it.
Sure. The name of my book is Grasping Sasquatch. Grasping Sasquatch, Prepping for Scientific Field Research. And it's 2 books in one, book 1 and book 2, but they're all bound together. And they're available at Hanger One Publishing, and on Amazon.
Very good. And the name of your YouTube videos are Grasping Sasquatch as well. You said, 32 episodes?
36 episodes, Grasping Sasquatch Stories in Science.
So is those 36 episodes, are they bound to your book in as far as what you're talking about?
Yes. Some very tightly, some a little more loosely. But yes, the book was the foundation for every episode. And so, in the first part of the book, we haven't talked much about it, but especially given that we're doing observational research primarily, and we're dealing with perception, and our perception will be impacted by fight flight. In the first half of that book, I teach people how to learn to modulate their fight flight response and stay calm in the face of what otherwise might be a traumatic kind of experience. They're the techniques I've used as a psychologist to treat PTSD, but you're using those in this case to prevent panic and prevent PTSD by reprogramming that response to certain scenarios. And that and psychological knowledge is in the first book. And then the second book is about developing and doing experimentation using experimental design and statistical analysis.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Pleasure's all mine.
Your show is still active on Untold Radio Network?
And on YouTube, yes.
And on YouTube.
Yep.
All right, sir. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it very much, Eric.
It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.